Hi, I'm Christy Carson, and today I'm speaking with John Lavagnino. And John and I have known each other for quite a long time because we're both in something which is called Digital Humanities, or at least it used to be called that. And John wrote a lovely piece summarizing the first few years, or depending upon where you put the beginning point, of the development of computers and literary study. And I'd say that we're almost at the point of the two coming together in an inseparable way at the moment. And so one of the reasons I wanted to talk to John was because he is such an expert in this field. His expertise contrasts some of the other people who are just starting out, learning for the first time how to use digital technology in support of their teaching. So John, would you mind just telling me what your current position is at King's and how you're using digital technology at the moment?
Well, I'm officially reader in digital humanities, and I teach in two different departments. I teach in an actual department of digital humanities, something that you don't run across at very many places. And it's a department that's full of a lot of different people. Some people are really sociologists, contemporary digital culture really take that approach. There are people who are archaeologists using digital methods to record digs, to communicate results. A couple of people like me who really have a background in literary studies. A couple of people who really study in fine detail the development of the computer industry and how that led to our contemporary world. But then I'm also in an English department, which actually has a few other people doing some of those same digital humanities things, but is mostly people working in a more traditional way, looking at texts, talking about them with students. We do have a group of people who work on contemporary performance, so there is at least a little bit that isn't just written down texts. But it is a kind of big difference between the two groups of students we have, the kind of research that's done, the kind of teaching that's done.
And so before the pandemic happened, before the lockdown, how much of your teaching was online? Was any of it online?
None at all,
Okay.
although lectures that I gave were recorded automatically in the classrooms, or were supposed to be. And one of the classes I was teaching in the spring had a lecture at 9 a.m. on Monday mornings.
Gosh.
And a surprising number of students showed up with me at 9 a.m. on Monday mornings. But as you can imagine, some thought it was more prudent to watch the recorded lecture later on.
Well, and my experience of that was that quite often actually visiting students wanted to, sometimes they came, but sometimes they wanted to revisit the lecture afterwards because it went too quickly, or there were,
Yeah.
elements that they found confusing. So what's interesting is I found that it became a performance, recorded performance, in the same way that, live theater has become a recorded performance that people can go over and review. But that is one of my problems, I guess, a little bit with that particular mode of recording, both for the theater and for the lecture environment, is that it's designed for a specific audience who's there at the moment, and it's a very different thing. And I was saying, particularly, I have a tendency to provoke or question. And if you take those moments out of a longer piece or a longer conversation, then you actually get yourself into potentially difficult areas if it's taken out of context. So are you happy with the idea of lecture capture? Do you think that it's a necessary thing, or is it, are we better off doing something that's more sort of a hybrid or blended learning with a Zoom or a MS Teams?
Well, one thing about lecture capture is it assumes that you still want to be giving hour-long lectures.
Yes.
And I'm, my plan for the future is to try to, if I'm not actually going to be in a lecture hall doing this, I'm not doing it in hour-long chunks. And thinking about breaking it up really along the fault lines where there were really already pauses or gaps between sections anyway. So that's one thing about it, is that it's kind of retaining the big chunk of time that was necessary for scheduling for people's convenience, and we don't need that. Trying to remember what the other thing I was going to say. Well, the other thing about it is you do have that problem of not getting response from people who are there, not seeing how it's working. And so I think I'll try to think about ways to do something that I haven't actually done very much in seminars, which is actually discuss the lecture I gave to them.
Okay.
And see what they've got to say about it, and
Absolutely.
what the responses are.
I think that's the other thing is that, a performance is only half of the conversation. The other half is, the reaction that you get. And that's particularly the case with teaching. So during the pandemic, have you moved to entirely online teaching?
Yeah, we've gone entirely online. I think it's about March 19th. I think I still had a scheduled class session that trying to remember now, but I think nobody showed up.
Right.
Or maybe very few people.
Yep.
Officially, the university had told us already that the following week would be the beginning of everything online. But that was the week that you could see everything hour by hour changing and shifting. So, so it very rapidly turned from being all in person, or at least if you chose, to something that was all online. But there was so little time that I didn't really change the approach I was using very much. I actually did record a lecture at home, but just at full length, and stuck that into the same lecture capture system. Okay. I think there were a few things that I recorded to talk about writing the essay for the module, the main assessment, and concerns about that I did break up into smaller pieces. Seminars we attempted to have online with Microsoft Teams, which our university chooses to use. Yeah. Which was like a lot of these online seminars, you have to get accustomed to things that aren't actually as dynamic or fast moving. And also, of course, we'd had no time to really prepare in using it to discuss with students. Yeah.
Yes, I was just going to say that's one of the reasons why I wanted to do these conversations, is because it does seem to me that people were sort of thrown in the deep end, and even people, as familiar with the technology as you, were potentially struggling. Did you get any training or supervision or helpful hints on developing your materials?
No, not really. After a few weeks, there started to be some bits and pieces of things, but in mid-March, I had never heard of Microsoft Teams. I didn't know this software even existed. And so it was, but it's not particularly hard to use. That's not really the problem. I think it is more difficult to get an idea of what you're going to do in class, to have a shared idea with the students of that. Now, one thing that helped is that the students and I knew each other already.
Yeah.
And one of the things I'm worried about for the autumn is starting a new class with students never met in person, and establishing the kind of a relationship that you need for a seminar.
I think that's the thing that's really interesting, and one of the things that I think everyone feels that, and I think there's literature on this that the OU, for example, the Open University, have always had in situ environments where they got to talk to each other, and then the correspondence things as well. So I think yes, it's much easier to get a group of people to have a conversation and forget about the technology if they know each other, as we're doing, than it is to establish that kind of rapport in the first place, because there's a lot of things that you miss, body language and you're in different contexts. So it's, you're taking yourself out of your home context, even though we're both still in our home context. So, this is the first time I've spoken to you from your home, and probably vice versa, right? So I think that's what the interesting thing is, that the university, the boundaries, the edges of the university have spread out. And that causes all sorts of questions, I guess, and reassessments. So have you changed as the from March the 18th or whatever it was, moving forward? Have you adapted and adopted new ways of working once you got the hang of MS Teams?
Well, there were so few weeks of the term left
Right,
that there were really only about 2 weeks of class sessions. Since then, what would normally be happening and what I've been doing is one-on-one meetings with students,
right.
particularly people working on dissertations at various levels, and that has partly gone very well, and some of it is sort of stumbled along a bit, and it is partly to do with how easy it's been to develop a relationship with somebody when you're only using this kind of method.
Well, it's interesting. And again, I guess that's one of the questions I have for you is what do you see the benefits of working in this way? Have there been any advantages from your point of view?
Um, I think it's in a way easier to schedule certain things
Mm,
um, because of London. It was always very difficult actually to get students to come and talk to me
mm,
because they were not actually in London every day. Um, Many could not afford to live in London.
mm,
And so there is a kind of way that people aren't hanging around. And I'm also in two departments.
right.
So I'm not hanging around in both of those as much as somebody who's only in one. Um, I really remember, primarily from being a postgraduate, learning an awful lot by just hanging around.
Mm,
And I've not found that, at least I'm not transferring a lot to students that way
yeah.
in the last couple of years.
Well, and the serendipity with colleagues as well. Again, I
Hmm.
think that's one of the things that, conversations in the hallway,
Hmm.
things that you can set up quite easily if, a student wants to do a dissertation on a subject that's slightly outside of your range, and then somebody walks by who has more knowledge of that, those are
Hmm.
the sorts of things that don't happen in this environment. I think that, there are definitely those sorts of drawbacks.
Hmm.
But yes, getting people together from a distance. And one of the things, I mean, I'm sure King's is like Royal Holloway, interested in continuing to have overseas students despite the
Hmm.
difficulties of travel and quarantine and all the rest of it. Do you think that there's going to be a move towards increasing the number of online only delivery of courses?
Um, well, I can't really say what the higher ups in administration are thinking. Um, the point of view of people in the departments I'm in uh, seems still to largely be, well, we'll have this year or two that are a special case, then we'll go back to what we've done before.
Okay.
And I think it probably won't go back to what we've done before because some things will simply turn out to be effective or convenient. Um, I,
So,
um,
sorry.
I was not among the people who, for example, objected to lecture capture.
Hmm.
There were a lot of people who felt that their relationship with the students in the room, even if they were delivering a prepared lecture, was very important.
Hmm.
And I thought probably students would get as much out of watching the lecture capture as seeing me in person.
Again, I think you're right. There's a wide range of opinion on that one.
Hmm.
And at the moment, is the plan for everything to be online in the autumn then?
Yeah, the plan is that essentially it will be an entirely online teaching approach in the autumn. There's some vague talk of maybe having some seminars and things at least that are essentially optional, so
Okay.
that anyone who is worried has a personal or living situation that makes it dangerous, anything like that will not need to, but that something like that will be available to students who would like to actually well, see other students in person.
Mm,
Um, I'm still wondering what will really happen, but
yeah.
that at least is the intention that we hear.
What sort of class sizes were you dealing with
Well, I
last
had
year?
one undergraduate English class that had 60 students in it,
Right.
and a colleague taught some of the seminars, we had seminars. Well, there's supposed to be 15 people or so, but because some of the times were more appealing than others, it got a bit lopsided. And then I taught a postgraduate class, a master's degree class for digital humanities that had 12 students.
Okay.
And it was a different sort of experience because they were postgraduates. In the past, I actually had taught that just as a long seminar without any lectures.
Okay.
And it changed it when the enrollment got big, and then year to year, you never know who's going to want to do the class. So I had not gotten around to reconfiguring it.
I was just wondering if you think there's an optimum number of people that you can deal with in an online environment. Because it does feel to me that there's an added, well, it seems to take more time and it seems to take more attention, individual attention. Do you think there's a kind of cutoff point to the numbers that you can deal with online in this way?
Yeah, so far I've felt that similar sorts of numbers for doing similar teaching seems fine. I think a seminar that gets above about 20 people starts to be just a little difficult to deal with, but not impossible. But it is just that the participation of individuals will necessarily go down, and it's that much harder for someone to get their point in if they aren't immediately jumping in and saying what they got to say.
No, absolutely. And I think that's one of the things I guess I wanted to ask you was whether you saw a difference between who was given sort of an advantage by the online environment, who sort of came forward and who sort of snuck to the back. You know, I mean, you do that in a class physically, but everybody's on the same level. But did you think that there were some people who found the technology intimidating or more difficult to navigate?
I didn't find it that different. One thing about Teams was, at least in March, no one could tell us how to do what I think in Zoom are breakout rooms.
Yeah.
In order to use the very common teaching technique in the seminar of asking students to gather in little groups and discuss something like that, report back. Just a very well-known approach to making sure that everyone has a chance to just say something, even if they don't think fast enough to get into discussion, or maybe just aren't comfortable with that, whatever. And so that wasn't something that we could do.
Do you use the chat environment and the discussion tools that are that come along with Teams, or is it just the online interaction?
We weren't actually using that in the classes I taught, although I've heard some people complaining about that, but actually I think it's a good idea. And it's pretty exposed to everyone else. So if you're going to be a jerk about it, it's still going to be visible to everyone.
I think that's the interesting thing about it is that, for a while now, we've been in I don't want to say compromised position, but a vulnerable position in that the students could record us, through their telephone, their, phones or any other way. Whereas now it's kind of an even playing field. We are being recorded, but so are they. So as you say, it's a much more exposing, but a much more equal environment. And if you're going to be a jerk about it, then it's going to be recorded. So I think that's it changes, I think, a little bit people's attitudes. Have you noticed a dip in participation or an increase in attention? Some people have said they actually find the sessions more focused because it's all concentrated.
I think people were a little less focused, but in March, the whole world was less focused.
Yeah.
So, none of my students in the end had big problems about things that I heard of, but I think everyone was worried, and there were certainly some people who just weren't there because they had other arrangements they were trying to make.
Yeah. So that's the interesting thing. I mean, it's both an advantage and a drawback to be able to do it from your home. I mean, you don't have to get childcare, but if a child is there, tugging at your sleeve while you're trying to study, it can be a bit complicated. Okay, I just wanted to ask you a couple more questions. First of all, do you have, for somebody just starting out in this environment, do you have any tips or any advice? Since I think a lot of people do feel very much thrown in at the deep end.
Yeah, I think having a good internet connection
Mm,
is really ultra important.
yeah.
Um, Try not to do it over Wi-Fi. Um,
Yes.
and these really basic things, if it's great if you don't have to think about them.
Mm.
And I've just always found with Wi-Fi that it's a little too much thinking involved.
Good point. And I
And
guess that do you think, in a longer term, if you go back to just being in the classroom, will you take any of the lessons learned or things that you've done in terms of gathering people's work together or, bringing people together in teams? Will you use it as a channel in addition to the in class?
um, have to see. In a way, something like the chat, I think, actually is a good thing to be going along in parallel, and
Mm,
something familiar to me from working group meetings and so on.
yeah.
That outside of the teaching context.
And to
So I
have
would,
questions posed to you while you're doing a lecture, and to be able to answer them in
for
real
example,
time.
yeah, or the kind of point that is simply saying, the author of that book is such and such.
Yeah.
It's useful to get it down there for the assistance of fellow students, that kind of thing.
Absolutely, or a link to something that you've been
Yeah,
referring to or something like that. So there is a record of it. Again, I
yeah,
think that's quite useful.
yeah. I in seminars, I don't even use PowerPoint or any kind of projection.
Okay.
I actually for English literature classes, I don't use PowerPoint. I always use paper handouts because people want to write on them.
Yeah.
And the kind of passages from literary works that I need to talk about are too long to actually work properly
Yeah.
on a PowerPoint slide.
Yeah.
It's not really meant for having very much text.
It's interesting,
Um,
isn't it? It is
yeah.
it is an audiovisual medium, it seems to me.
Yeah. Um, but after this, I may try to do a bit more of that. Use technology a bit more in seminars. Certainly, it can be effective as for example, as a sort of version of a whiteboard,
Mm,
just to collect things people are saying and
yeah.
write them down.
And to be able to
Um,
share things on your screen if you've, got
yeah.
several things going on and,
Hmm.
it's in your head and you forget that it's
Hmm.
not necessarily something that they know or have
Yeah.
referred to actually, yeah, let that person mention it in the moment that you've
Hmm.
skipped over something. I think
Yeah.
that's one of the things that often happens in lectures is that people are nudging each other, sort of saying, what did he say? What is that about?
Mm.
And this is a way of addressing that again, sort of straight away.
Yeah, I've heard from students that there are actually uh, communities of discussion about lectures by other people,
Okay.
with people saying, "Now, what was really meant at 10 minutes 45 seconds? What
Wow.
is that word there?"
Okay. But on the other hand, you were saying that you're now doing that with your
Mm,
your students, having a discussion about what you meant in the lecture.
yeah,
So I
yeah.
think it's
So, or that's what I'm thinking of doing. To
okay.
just, I haven't actually done a lot of, say, certainly not anything like quizzing them, but even just sort of
Okay.
discussing, um, the kind of thing that people often do, saying, say, what did you think was the most interesting idea in the lecture,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
something like that,
And
just
making
to get the kind of feedback that you're not going to get in the same way from something that is simply pre-recorded.
yeah. So do you think that the future, I guess, is blended between the two forms, or do you think we will go back to the entirely alive when we can?
I think it will be blended. I think if nothing else, it will be too attractive to not use a lot of real estate for
Hmm.
things like lectures.
Absolutely. And I
And
think there is, yes, increasingly a question, as you say, about the cost of living nearby.
mhm,
So there will be lessons to be learned, I think.
yeah.
Well, that's absolutely wonderful. Thanks so much for having a chat with me about all this. I think, we're in such changing times.
Mm.
I think it's worth taking a minute just to think about it a little bit.
Well, thank you. It's very interesting.
Thank you. Oops.